Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest edition of Mainly Facts Weekly, where we invite you to join us on a delightful journey through the most captivating stories of the week. So sit back, relax, and prepare to be entertained. If you're seeking a recap of this week's most remarkable events, you've come to the perfect place. Don't forget to leave the timestamp of your favorite story. Like and subscribe to our channel for more entertaining stories like these. Without further ado, let's begin. Folks who have ever hired homeless people with the "will work for food" signs, what was your experience like? Story 1. We've hired hundreds of them over the last 20 years, mainly because I'm lazy and I can make more money with my time doing what I do. The only really memorable one was Tavon. Tavon stopped me in our parking lot one Friday morning and said he needed some work and he was willing to do whatever we had. Just the day before, I'd gotten a notice from the city saying the bamboo on our back lot was getting out of hand and we needed to get rid of it. It's a little over an acre, and if you've ever seen how bamboo grows there, were thousands of 20-foot stalks. Told him I'd give him $100 to do it. Gave him a machete and figured I'd never see him or the machete again. Over the course of the day, he cut every dang piece of bamboo down and had them laid in a couple of huge piles. Paid him his money, thanked him, and told him I'd get my guys to haul it to the dump Monday. He asked me if he could have the big pieces first, and I gladly let him. Came back on Monday morning, and he was back in the lot helping somebody load a monster-sized load of bamboo onto a trailer. He'd spent the weekend cutting all the branches off and trimming it into 6-foot-long sections and was selling them all for $350 to a local plant nursery he'd done day labor work for in the past. We talked about it for a few minutes after the truck left, and he just kept smiling and saying there was a hustle in everything. You just had to find it. So you get a notice about removing the bamboo, then a day later Tavon shows up looking for work. I think you hustled more than you realized. I think my one qualm with this story is the fact this person's hired hundreds over the last 20 years because they're lazy and can make more money doing what you do. But, capitalism. Who am I to judge, I guess. But, yeah, Tavon sounds like a pretty clever fella, so I hope things have worked out well for him and he's found himself a better spot in life. Story 2. I worked at a Steak and Shake as a waitress on the graveyard shift throughout college. Weirdest frickin' place I ever worked. It was right off the interstate and we got the strangest people at around 3 a.m. every night. Anyway, my manager was a really nice guy and one day saw a homeless lady crying outside. She said she had ridden her bike for 10 miles to get an interview at the hotel next door, and when the hotel manager realized she was homeless, he basically told her to get the F out and didn't even bother interviewing her. She was so distressed that she just sat down and cried, and my manager saw her while he was taking out the garbage and asked if she was okay. After hearing her story, he hired her as a cook, and she was seriously the hardest working person we've had in the entire restaurant. She would take any shift and was never late and never complained. She was pretty rough around the edges and missing most of her teeth, and I don't know if she could have actually had a job where she had to interact one-on-one with the customers, but I'd be damned if she wasn't an awesome line cook. I left that job shortly thereafter. Again, weirdest place I ever worked. So I don't know what happened to her. I hope she saved enough to be able to afford housing because she was really trying to turn her life around. I'm currently homeless and I don't look for it because there are tons of resources in the city I'm located. I walked 11 miles one day just to get an interview. Wasn't even an interview. It was him telling me if he will call me again. Let's hope he calls me. I had a big resume and I sent an email after saying thank you for the interview. It is heartbreaking what a lot of homeless folks have to go through because, yeah, like people say, like, well, they should just get a job, but they try to go get a job and then are turned away without anyone listening, and that breaks my heart. And I could ramble on and on about how people shouldn't have to go through this job or not, but yeah, if you are in charge of hiring and someone comes in and they're homeless, give them a shot. Story 3. My parents have a house in Florida they rent out. My dad was down there doing repairs to it when a homeless man on a bike stopped by and asked if my dad needed help. Dad decided to hire him. Alton, the homeless man, helped my dad repaint the house, mow the lawn, and cut all the overgrown plants. When the house wasn't rented and my family was up north, my dad paid Alton to mow the yard and keep an eye on the place. While working with my dad, Alton asked Dad if he could borrow some money to buy some nice pants and shoes for an interview he had for a job. Dad wasn't sure he could trust him yet, so instead my dad took him out to a store and they went shopping together for these items. Alton got the job as a chef and eventually got himself a room in a house with some other guys. Occasionally, Alton will ask my dad for some emergency money and he always finds a way to pay it back. I find it interesting that my dad was so open to work with Alton due to him being both black and poor, those being two types of people my dad can say judgmental things about. Either way, I'm glad it all worked out for Alton. He was humanized. He was no longer just a person of a certain skin color or economic stratum. He was Alton. It's a lot harder to hate when you realize the object of your hatred is a real, sympathetic person. We could all use more Altons in our lives. Hey, I think if there is any message that should be taken away from this whole video, it's surmised in those last couple sentences that you need to realize that these are people. They are real, sympathetic people. And just because they're homeless, you can't make prejudgments about that. So, good for Alton. I hope he's doing well. Story 4. I once picked up a hitchhiker that was trying to get from Washington to New Mexico when I was camping in Yellowstone. He had family in New Mexico that offered to help him and had a good job lined up. He just had to get there. So we picked him up and took him back to Colorado with us. He stovered on our couch for a week or two and picked up our mess and took care of maintenance I grossly neglected. My roommates and I were in college at the time and partied 3 to 4 days a week, so you can imagine the mess. The little money he would get from doing odd jobs for neighbors and such, he would buy food and beer for all of us. One day I had an errand to run about 50 miles closer to his destination, but still 300 plus miles from where he needed to be. He came with me, and when he got out of the car, handed me a letter that said, "Don't read it until I get home," then walked through a field straight towards the Rocky Mountains. When I got home, we all read the letter, and it's the kindest set of words I've ever received. About a month later, we got a call from an area code I don't recognize. It was him. He made it and called us on his first payday at his new gig. He also told us about the remainder of his journey. Turns out he walked and camped a large portion of the way back. I've since moved multiple times and have grown up a bit. He's still welcome back whenever he wants, though. I hope all is well, Freddie. Story 5. One super cold night over Christmas break a couple years ago, my roommates and I were walking to Taco Bell and saw a homeless man laying in the parking lot. He had a cheap, thin blanket, so we bought him some food and asked if he wanted to spend the night inside, and he came back and stayed at our house. Via Facebook, we helped him find his daughter, who he hadn't spoken to in a couple years, and he was able to wish her a Merry Christmas. I spent the night worrying that he would steal everything in the house. When I woke up, the blankets were neatly folded, and he had left us 2 pairs of socks and some deodorant. A week later, we came home to find that someone had raked all of our leaves for us. I haven't seen him since, but I hope he's well. 10 out of 10, would do again. You probably showed him the only love he's felt in a long time. Story 6. In college, I got my fraternity to hire a homeless guy I always talked to do security for our parties. I went to college in a pretty crappy city, and my fraternity never turned people away from our parties, so we sometimes had to worry about gang members wandering in. I actually met a former Latin king who was pretty cool. The school wouldn't provide security since it could be seen as them condoning underage drinking, so I suggested we hire this homeless guy I knew who was always at my go-to Munchies gas station because he had actually helped me out when I almost got mugged once and knew a lot of the less than savory characters. We told him we just needed him to let us know if there was anyone he knew might cause a problem. Dude was more professional than most bouncers at the bar I've been to. He made everyone that wasn't obviously a student show their necks and wrists for gang tattoos and ran a tight frickin' ship. Our president ended up getting him a bouncer job at a club downtown. Hey, sometimes it's the small things you can do. You're not like a big business owner or anything like that, but you helped out how you could, and maybe that was enough to help this person get a little cash, turn their life around, do something. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But I think what you did there was a good thing. Story 7. I was homeless for 4 years, 15 to 19. One day I applied for a security guard job at the local hospital for a joke. Was punkish at the time. When I showed up, I almost scared the guy off, but he shook it off and asked me to stay for the interview. For the first half hour, he asked me questions one would ask any applicant. After he finished, he looked at me and asked me my story. We sat and talked for close to 2 hours. I got my stuff and was preparing to leave when he came up and told me, cut your hair, take off the piercings, and be here on Wednesday. You look like a guy that could use a change in life. I went back to my hole that night and thought things through. It was August 16th, 2001. I've been drug-free and off the streets ever since. Sometimes all we need in life is a chance to prove ourselves. Story 8. I ran into a high school classmate a while back. I've posted this before, but it bears repeating. A guy in high school just didn't like me and him. We got into a big dang fight. He broke my nose and I knocked a couple of his teeth out off campus. No police were involved, but about 10 years later I saw him sleeping on the streets near where I worked. I woke him up and asked him what was going on. He told me about his life after high school. He knocked up his girlfriend, her parents made them get married, divorce a year later. He got into drugs and ended up alienating everyone. I asked him if he was still using, and he said no, he couldn't buy a dose anyway. I felt bad for him, so I asked if he'd like to stay at my guest house, a one-room cottage set up like an efficiency apartment for a while. He took me up on it and got a night's sleep in an actual bed for the first time in years, his words. I bought him some clothes and fed him for about a month until I found him a job with a contractor I was doing some work for. Long story short, it's been 6 years. He now owns a contracting business, has a wife, a new baby boy, and just bought the house down the street from me. I really genuinely love these last couple stories, and, especially even like this one, because this was someone that was an enemy of yours in the past, and you still went and helped, and this person was able to turn their life around. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of compassion, and I know folks can say that compassion doesn't always work. Sometimes you get ripped off. Sometimes it doesn't go well. Sometimes whatever. But when compassion does work, when you can be compassionate and help someone turn their life around like this, I think that it's worth the risk. What is one profession where you don't want to hear them genuinely say, oops, on the job? Story 1. Presidential candidate, apparently. Perry. And I will tell you, it is 3 agencies of government when I get there that are gone. Commerce, education, and the, what's the third one there? Let's see. Paul, you need 5. Perry. Oh, 5. Okay, so commerce, education, and the, unknown. EPA? Perry, EPA, there you go. Hardwood, seriously, is the EPA the one you were talking about? Perry, no sir, we're talking about the agencies of government. The EPA needs to be rebuilt. There's no doubt about that. But you can't name the third one. Well, the third agency of government, I would do away with education, the commerce. Commerce, and let's see, I can't, the third one, I can't, sorry, oops. In case you're wondering, it really is that uncomfortable to watch. On the other hand, he became Trump's energy secretary. Ironic, really, considering the third agency that he wanted to get rid of was energy. The one agency he couldn't remember. It's so crazy that we went from stuff like this, the Howard Dean scream, or Gary Johnson's Aleppo mishap ruining campaigns, to Trump. I haven't actually seen this exchange, so I don't know if he was Southern or not. I made some creative choices, and I hope that you all stand with me. And thank you, unnamed contributor, for your help. Oh, you're welcome. Also, I know some of you are younger watching this. If you're not familiar with the Howard Dean scream, just look up Howard Dean scream and get ready for just seeing a politician lose his marbles for like 2 seconds. It's great. Story 2. So I did hear someone say oops while I was getting a needle aspiration biopsy for thyroid cancer, and they were looking to see where to go in with an ultrasound. The doctor takes a stab and the radiology tech goes, oops, nope, that's her jugular. And they just kind of laughed and shrugged and kept going, so apparently I was the only one who found that untoward. Well, I am glad I didn't read stories like this before I had my own FNA biopsy. Endocrinology numbed my neck up real well and got samples really quickly. In my case, it did turn out to be cancer, but I got rid of it. I hope the same for you if it was a positive biopsy. Got diagnosed in 2010, 3 surgeries and 2 radiations later, I'm clear as far as I know. I'm happy to hear you're good too. I've had like 4 FNAs and I'm resistant to lidocaine, so they all hurt like hell. The first one was the worst because they did a core 2, which felt like getting a hole punched through my throat. Yikes. Mine seems so easy in comparison, lol. For such a small little organ, though, the thyroid causes so much trouble for a lot of people. I didn't feel bad about kicking mine out, that's for sure. I think we'll definitely see a lot of repeats of no one wants to hear a doctor say oops, but I am at least very glad to hear that both of these posters turned out okay. Cancer's no joke, and I'm always happy to see when people manage to pull through.
Story 3. I have 2 personal experiences that fit this, but maybe weren't that bad. One, I was getting a colonoscopy, and the anesthesiologist came in to go over the process with me and dropped his clipboard, making papers go flying everywhere. He drops down to pick them up and huffs under his breath, this is just one of those days. I was like, great, I'm gonna die. 2, I had to get a wisdom tooth taken out. The dentist comes in wearing flip-flops, shorts, a Hawaiian shirt, and is limping, plops down on his seat and goes, here we go. It totally looked like he woke up, hung over his balls, came to operate on my mouth. The best dental experience I've ever had was an old guy in a Hawaiian shirt who was acting kind of similarly. That's the only effing dentist who has ever actually fully numbed my mouth before working on my teeth. I'm extremely resistant to local anesthetics, unfortunately. If I'm gonna be effed up while I do this, he's gonna be effed up while I do this. I really don't want to listen to any screaming while I work my way through this hangover. Story 4. Bungee jump operator, no idea what the actual job title is, but I'm sure you know what I mean. In my intro to engineering class in college, one team project everyone worked on was a bungee jump simulation, where we had to calculate the correct length of cord needed for the attached weight to drop from a height, get close to the floor, but not touch the floor based on the stretchiness of the cord or whatever. I changed majors, so I don't remember the details. Only one group didn't have their weight hit the floor. I knew at the end of that project that I would never be an engineer, a bungee jump operator, or a person who goes bungee jumping. Let me guess, everyone forgot to take momentum into their calculations? I don't even remember. It was so long ago, lol. It was most likely a combo of bad data, college freshman stupidity, unclear instructions from the professor, and no one knowing how to use Excel, which was what we were using for all our calculations. Oddly, I'm really good at Excel now, and I wonder if I could solve that problem if I ever came upon my notes for the class. I have a feeling it was unnecessarily overcomplicated. Edit. I met my husband in this class and just asked him. He continued on and is now an engineer, and he's pretty sure everyone forgot about momentum and everyone got their data from static loads, which was wrong for estimating the calculations for a dropped load. But we're both kinda hazy on the details because freshman year was, sadly, quite a while ago.
I've gotta say, if I was a bungee jump operator, I would constantly be tempted where when people were just getting ready to go, the moment they started to tip over, just then they'd be like, oops. I don't think I actually would do that. I'm sure some people would absolutely panic and get hurt, but it's funny to think about.
Story 5. This isn't as critical as some jobs, but when I was in school for computer IT in the late 90s, our teacher always emphasized that if we ever have to make a house call to fix a person's computer, never say oops. People freak out. That said, I never want to hear the guy in charge of hitting the nuclear launch button say oops. I have a friend who's a dentist, and he always joked that he never says oops when he makes a mistake. He just says rinse. Whenever they accidentally make you bleed, they just say, it's because you don't floss enough. Before I got braces when I was a teenager, my bottom teeth were very close together with some of them being pushed forward due to being too close. To remedy this, they took sandpaper and sanded between my teeth to file them down and create more space. As a result, I was bleeding everywhere because they rubbed sandpaper between my teeth. You're bleeding because you need to floss more, is what they told me. Story 6. Nuclear missile operator. Oddly enough, people have said oops a surprising amount, and nothing really happened. Countries, mostly the US, have lost a terrifying amount of nuclear weapons. The US specifically is not good with nuclear weapons. One missile silo was reported as being wide open, and the operators were asleep. They ordered a pizza, and the pizza guy just found a nuclear weapon which he could have gotten a friend and launched. John Oliver's piece on it. The U.S. is much more transparent than the USSR or even modern-day Russia. The USSR and Russia have been known to and have lied many, many times about their weapons of mass destruction. If a missile silo was left wide open in the USSR, you were certainly not allowed to report on it on the news. Likewise for China. Saying the U.S. specifically is not good with nuclear weapons without qualifying that we don't have data from any other nuclear weapons states is misleading. Ascribing confidence in Russia like that is the first sign they've never been in or have dealt with Russia. Story 7. A medical specialist, a good friend, had to have a spinal tap for intracranial hypertension. She had no one to go with her and she was very scared, so I went with her so she wouldn't be alone. As the neurology registrar put the needle in, he said, "Oh crap," under his breath, but loud enough that we both heard. My friend suddenly says, "Is it supposed to feel like it's in my lungs?" The registrar looked at his supervisor with a look of sheer panic. Luckily, my friend was lying face down so she couldn't see what was happening. The supervising neurologist took over, pulled the needle out, and put it in correctly, at which point my friend let out an awful cry, and the procedure was done within a couple minutes. I told her what happened the next day, figured no point scaring her while she needed to relax and recover. Well, in this case, you've had a combination lung and spinal tap, so while not strictly normal, it is normal for this particular procedure.
So again, we have, a medical specialist, doctor, something in that field. I do have to say, I think if a doctor, a surgeon, whatever, says oops, it's a mistake that's like, oh, oops. It's not that bad. It's when a doctor suddenly goes dead quiet and is mumbling to a nurse. That's much more concerning, I think.
Story 8. A tattoo artist. The one I worked for would say it all the time just to mess with the client. 2 O's and Bob, right? You're goddamn right there is. Story 9. A mime. Touché. Underrated response. It's literally the top response on here. Story 10. I legit had a dentist say this one time while he was working on my teeth. I immediately tensed up and tried asking what happened, but my mouth was forced open, and as soon as he heard me say something, he told me to try not to talk, and so I had no choice but to go back to just being still. For some reason, once he was all done, I either forgot to ask what happened, or I intentionally decided not to. But yeah, that was incredibly frightening, even if it seems nothing major came of it. Honestly, they probably just dropped something in your mouth and didn't want you to swallow it or aspirate it. It happens. Accurate. Dang it, I knew today was the wrong day to bring Francis, my pet spider, with me while I was working. What is the most embarrassing way your body has betrayed you?
Story 1. I have IBS and get a really insanely distended stomach full of gas when I eat certain foods. It looks like there's a basketball under my skin and it's all gas. My boyfriend of a year or so knew about my IBS but hadn't really experienced the worst of it. One day we were hanging out at my apartment and I had my big gas belly. He knew what that meant, so I excused myself to my room to try and fart some of it out. He decided to come in to show me something on his phone as I'm laying on my bed with my knees up trying to coax the gas out. He starts laughing at the sight, I start laughing. I feel an epic release of gas coming and I try to tell him to leave as soon as possible, but I'm also laughing. Between the laughter and the position I was in, I couldn't hold it back. I let out the loudest, longest fart in history. At first, he laughed in surprise, and then as it kept going on, his face changed from laughter to surprise to shock, mixed with what looked like a twinge of sadness. Watching him go through so many emotions right on his face just made me laugh harder, so the fart just kept going. After what feels like an eternity, he steps out of the room, hands over his mouth. He comes back in, and the fart is finishing off with a final toot toot toot. He is speechless. The first thing he said is, "I feel like I lived 80 years, died, and came back to life again before that fart ended. I just don't understand how it was so long and steady." And then it got all Louis Armstrong at the end. And that's how we started calling certain trumpety farts Louis. Also, we moved in together a few months later, so my butt performance didn't deter him too much. First off, without context, that last sentence is a little wild. But second, that's an amazing story. And I, for one, applaud you and starting off this video on a very wonderful tenor. Story 2. I peed myself in class. I was wearing a skirt and no tights. I was 17. It was my first year of college, and the lecture lasted 4 hours. I held it as long as I possibly could until at some point I was 100% certain I would pee myself as soon as I stood up. I couldn't excuse myself to the bathroom because I'd peed myself on the way in front of everybody. I'd pee myself on the way in front of everybody. So I stayed. I waited until the other students left, but they didn't. Of course, they had questions for the professor. Some lingered. I got out, miraculously made it out of the classroom. Then as soon as I was out of the door, I couldn't hold it anymore. I kneeled down on the floor, pretended to look for something in my bag. Someone even asked if I was okay, hoping against all hope that no one would notice the puddle at my feet. I kept pretending to look in my bag for 5 more minutes until everyone was gone, then walked to the nearest bathroom to dry myself as best I could. Then I went home, changed my underwear, and dried my skirt and shoes with a hairdryer because it would look suspicious if I came back with different clothes. No one ever mentioned it. To this day, I wonder if some did see it and avoid talking about it, who spare me the embarrassment, or if I somehow managed to hide it. At 17, you worry everyone will notice you change clothes. At 19, you realize no one will give a frick. Who gives a 4-hour lecture without having a bathroom break in there? That's wild. I could not go 4 hours without needing a bathroom break. That's ridiculous. And I mean, honestly, I'll tell you this, folks. If you're like in a college lecture and you gotta pee, just get up and go pee. Especially in a lecture hall with all those students. If the professor's the kind of person who'd be like, excuse me, where do you think you're going? You'd throw a book at that professor. F off.
Story 3. I danced classical ballet for years when I was younger. One day when I was 12, we were doing a stretch where we were lying on our backs with our butts scooted to the wall and our legs stretched toward the ceiling. We would let our legs fall into the splits, letting gravity to assist us. So we were lying there listening to quiet piano music, my legs wide open, and the girl next to me was whispering jokes and making me giggle. I could feel the onslaught of explosive gas happening, but being young and stupid, I was afraid to close my legs because I thought I'd get in trouble. So I ripped the loudest, most terrifying fart to ever exist. I think I blew a hole in my little pink leotard. I swear to God, the room was a huge wooden studio, so that fart from heck was bouncing off the walls for like 15 minutes. All the little girls started screaming, I was screaming, and the teacher was probably screaming. Still gives me nightmares. Story 4. I once went to school when I felt really sick. Within 10 minutes of me being at school, my stomach started cramping and I informed the teacher I was going home. It's about a 10-minute drive with my bike. Every time I went over the littlest bump, my stomach started hurting really bad. Not even 2 minutes of me biking to my house and I stop and throw up. I throw up so bad that I start crapping my pants. A lot. Some of my friends start driving by, but I don't think they notice me. I call my dad, who didn't have any way of bringing me home. He did, however, have a scooter. He comes along and I tell him I need to go home, but not on the bike. He tells me there's no other way, so I get on the bike with crap still in my pants and we drive home together. This is the ultimate duo, Scooter Dad and Crap Pants Kid.
Scooter Dad and Crap Pants Kids, this fall on Fox. I just think that's not a story that I think you'll ever feel 100% good about, but at least you felt good enough to share it here and give us all a bit of a chuckle, so don't be too hard on yourself.
Story 5. 2 hours train ride. I felt the air coming slowly, but I held it back until the end. Finally, the next stop was mine, so I stood up and walked to the door, still holding back that now massive amount of air in my colon. Just when the doors were about to open, some child stumbled into me from behind. It surprised me so much that I, just for a moment, didn't hold in. The result was the loudest, most disgusting fart you could ever imagine. I never left the train station faster in my entire life. OP is resting with one hand on a wall, breathing heavily from running for 20 minutes. He looks up and sees a TV in a pub with closed captions. Concentrated fart in a local train proves deadly. One child has been killed and many more hospitalized. Oh crap. Keep running. Story 6. Last summer I tripped over something while walking on the sidewalk. Happens every now and then, no big deal. It normally just looks like a funny skip or something. Except this time I kind of leaped forward into the air and somehow the normal response message to put my hands before me didn't reach its destination, so I just dropped into the ground like a human sack of potatoes. It was about equally painful and embarrassing. Still don't know how the frick happened. Brain blue screens. Story 7. One time I was really sick, so I went to throw up in the toilet, and as I started throwing up, I simultaneously started pooping myself as well. Once you start throwing up, you can't exactly stop until you're done, so I just kept throwing up while pooping for the smelliest, most uncomfortable 5 minutes or so of my life. Ever since, I stopped being able to throw up like a normal person. I'm always scared I'll crap myself, so I sit on the toilet, bending over a bucket, even though it's harder to throw up that way. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this trip down memory lane as much as I did.
A lot of people pooping themselves in this video, and I do genuinely feel bad for these folks, because that's not a fun memory to have, I imagine, but, you know, I mean, you're sharing it. We can all have a laugh about it. Frankly, I think we need to remember that everybody poops themselves eventually.
Story 8. In a meeting with my managers, they're complaining about X, Y, and Z that I haven't achieved. I'm not upset about the criticisms. If anything, I'm angry to have to hear them, but for some bizarre reason, my eyes started watering. We'd have these meetings weekly, and every time my eyes would water and tears would pour. It started just happening when I wasn't even angry, and even in normal angry situations, I'd never tear up, just in those meetings. Oh my god, I have the same thing. Whenever I'm confronted by something by a superior, I start crying for some reason. It sucks because I don't want them to think I'm upset about minor things, because I'm not. Story 9. 5th grade, math test. Felt a sneeze coming and tried to hold the sneeze in to maintain the mandated silence. Ended up farting on a wooden seat chair that resonated the sound perfectly. So basically, Story 10. Boner at the psychiatrist. Hit it pretty well, but it was still towards the end of the session. That was just a dream, Tony Soprano. Story 11. I was sitting on the floor in my cheap wooden condo and let out a huge fart. Dog in the condo below me started barking, and I could hear the cute girl who lived there and her visiting parents laughing. Should have said excuse me loud enough for them to hear. What's the funniest lie to tell kids?
Story 1. I forgot how it started, but my husband, boyfriend at the time, was trying to convince his 4-year-old brother that his feet were going to fall off. The lie got more and more elaborate, like explaining how he'd have to learn how to walk around on his ankles until his adult feet came in, etc. He was skeptical even when I agreed that it was true that everyone loses their baby feet before their adult feet grow in. At the time, their house was being upgraded from dial-up internet to DSL, and the phone tech was wandering in and out. He happened to come in towards the end and said, "Oh yeah, I remember when I lost my baby feet. Took a year for my new ones to come in." Little brother's face fell immediately, because it must be true if the stranger was corroborating. He ran out of the room to tell his mom, yelling, "But I like my feet!" And we all laughed, even his mom when she found out. He's an adult now, and my husband and I still razz him about it when we see him. Edit, husband reminded me about the part where he yelled about liking his feet. Phone tech is the real MVP here, for real. It takes a special type of person to walk in, see his child's face, and immediately play along for no information given. I mean, I'm all for open, honest communication with kids, but there is an age where they're around like 3, 4, 5. It's just too fun to joke with them like this, you know, just the little things that they're going to believe for, you know, just a while, just long enough for it to be something funny you can all laugh about later. I hope that's not damaging to psyches, but, you know, don't go too far, but hey, you know, feet falling off? I like it. Story 2. Me. How old are you now? Kid. 6. Me. Wow, when I was your age, I was only 9. It's great to see the very puzzled look on their faces. Reminds me of a Shel Silverstein poem. When I was your age, my uncle said, "How do you get to school?" I said, "By bus." And my uncle smiled. When I was your age, my uncle said, I walked it barefoot 7 miles. My uncle said, "How much weight can you tote?" I said, 1 bag of grain. My uncle laughed. When I was your age, my uncle said, I could lift a wagon and lift a calf. My uncle said, "How many fights have you had?" I said, 2, and both times I got whipped. When I was your age, my uncle said, I fought every day and was never licked. My uncle said, "How old are you?" I said, 9.5. And then my uncle puffed out his chest and said, "When I was your age, I was 10. I like this a lot because the moral is, your uncle is an effing liar, which is universally true. As a proud uncle, I can tell you, here and now, video evidence, that is 100% true. I definitely lie to my nephews and nieces, but only to put smiles on their faces. And because I'm a jerk.
Story 3. When we were in the car and it was raining, my mom would wait for a bridge or tunnel, and as we approached it, she would tell us she was going to make the rain stop on 3, 2, 1. She told us she could only make the rain stop for a minute because it made her so tired. My siblings and I were convinced she was magic. My dad made the traffic lights turn green. I asked why he waited a few minutes before using his power, and he said, "It's important to let others have a turn and go ahead of you." GG, magician. Story 4. My friend's parents told her that moose weren't really growing up, like unicorns and moose were both fictional creatures. When she got to high school, someone was talking about seeing a moose, and she thought they were trying to be funny, and basically she found out at 16 that moose are in fact real. When she went home to tell her parents, her mom was in tears of laughter. So yeah, probably telling your kid growing up that a very existent animal is a fictional creature. My friend did not believe red pandas were real until I took photos of them at our local zoo, despite photos also being readily available online. She said they were photoshopped raccoons. A new fantasy creature known as the video game raccoon.
Honestly, I can kind of understand not believing in moose because I remember being like 6 or 7 years old and my dad taking me to a barber shop and they had a mounted moose's head in there. And as a kid, I remember seeing this and be like, "Oh, that's so big, it must be fake." And my dad's like, "Nope, that's what a moose really is." And I was like, "Nah, that's not real."
Story 5. When me and my brother were kids and complained about something, my dad would go to the phone and say, "Hello, complaint department," and describe our grievances. He said the complaint department for everybody was in Calgary and was run by someone called Chief Owakanoak, and he was getting tired of our complaints. I believed that for the longest time. But did Chief Owakanoak ever do anything to resolve your complaints? Story 6. My sister told me that yellow leaves tasted like bananas and brown tasted like chocolate. I apparently went and ate leaves, but came back and told her they don't taste how she said they would. She told me I must have eaten a bad batch. So I continued to try to find and eat these tasty leaves. Too bad you couldn't find a star leaf. Those things looked amazing. Land Before Time? The grasses Spike ate when he hatched also looked pretty good.
I mean, honestly, I kind of like that one. You shouldn't try to eat leaves. It's actually pretty bad for your teeth. But it's still funny to see a kid try and eat at least 1 or 2 leaves. And yeah, I mean, if they were as good as the ones from the Land Before Time, oh, those leaves did look delicious.
Story 7. My wife and I have convinced our 6-year-old that you can only go to Chuck E. Cheese if you're invited by someone else for a birthday party. I guess it's kind of like the Freemasons. So far, none of his friends have asked for a Chuck E. Cheese party. Edit, for those pointing out that you have to ask to be a Freemason, not wait to get invited, that's the joke, .jpg. I'm like comparing waiting to get asked versus asking. But wait, then how do people start Chuck E. Cheese parties if you can only go to the parties? They have to be invited to one and then just stay after. Story 8. I convinced my kids I was a Jedi. I waved my right hand to turn up the volume on my car while secretly using my left hand to turn up the volume with the steering wheel controls. I did the same thing with the electronic controls for my seat. When they challenged me to do something else, I replied that I had already done too much because a Jedi should never use the Force for trivial things. Can you use the Force to make traffic lights turn green? While definitely not watching the cross street lights out of the corner of your eye? Good suggestion. Story 9. That your ears turn purple when you lie. My best friend's mom told her this when we were little, and she covered her ears or looked down her ponytail every time she lied until she was 8. I remember discovering mirrors at 8 too. You lie to yourself in the mirror? Story 10. The ice cream truck only plays music when it's out of ice cream. My neighbors told their kids it was the broccoli truck. Let's get this straight. Story 11. Unplugs the joystick. You control the bad guys. I remember my brother thinking he was smart by letting me be second player in Duck Hunt. Turns out the controller controls the ducks, and you can't hit them if they constantly flip left and right between two sprites. Yeah, me and a friend were trading off on Duck Hunt, and his younger cousin showed up and asked for a turn. I told him, "You can be the ducks," and handed him the controller. I thought I was lying, but man, did those ducks get hard to shoot. Had to try it for myself.
I gotta say, yeah, there's nothing wrong where when a kid is too young to really play video games and understand, give him the second controller when it's not like fully, well, I guess controllers aren't plugged in this day and age. They're all wireless. But back in the day they were. You put in the little click, except you don't put it all the way in. You hand it to them and they're just sitting there doing stuff. But nowadays, I don't know. I think most kids that age can probably play the games better than me anyway, so I would probably have to be the one with the off controller.
Story 12. My friend said he was once in the car with his family and they drove past an industrial plant. Smoke was billowing out of a chute, as they do at these plants. He asked his mom what it was, and she told him it was the cloud factory, and those were the clouds being released into the sky. He said he honestly thought clouds were man-made for a better portion of his life. I always thought it was some dude's job to wake up before everyone else, strap on a jetpack, and make the clouds himself. On days it was cloudless, it was his day off. Story 13. That if they don't eat their vegetables, they won't be able to poop and they'll explode. That one's more of an exaggeration than an outright lie. Story 14. I told my 7-year-old sister that if you lick your fingers and wipe it off in your ear, you will have way better hearing, and when she did it, I talked a little louder and raised the volume on our TV when she wasn't looking. She did this every day till her teacher said that it wasn't true. I used to hold my feet up in the air and tell my sister to smell my socks because I stepped in candy. She fell for it way more times than I expected. Sometimes it would take some convincing, as she was a little dubious from previous experiences. What did you do to convince her? Story 15. My baby sister was 4 when I was 20. One day it was storming very hard, very loud lightning. Sister was terrified, but eventually fell asleep. When she was napping, I had to run out into the rain for a bit and was absolutely soaked. Maybe 10 minutes later, it stopped raining and my sister woke up and saw me and asked why I was so wet. I said, "Well, since you were so scared, I went and fought the storm. I won," and pointed outside. She ran to look and saw it was clearing up.
Honestly, I think that's pretty cool. What a fun legend to think, that your baby sister thinks that you are the storm fighter. You could even, get some pictures that you set up next time there's a storm of you with, a sword and shield or something just swiping into the rain, except probably don't hold up a metal sword in the middle of a storm. That's not a great idea. The storm will win.
What's something a friend has said to you that changed the way you look at them?
Story 1. My friend Jen had recently split from her husband of 10 years due to not only a verbally abusive relationship, but also because she found out he was sleeping with his secretary. In my 1-year friendship with her, I'd witnessed him saying things like, "I don't know why you hide your smoking, Jen. You smell effing disgusting, and you obviously want to leave your son without a mom. I'm not trying to sound rude, but you're never going to look great in anything until you lose weight. I'm just being honest with you to help you." She was 5'4" and 150 pounds. Jen never gets eaten out because she doesn't keep her meat flaps clean enough. Why do you hug everyone who comes over? Do you have to remind everyone how dirty you are when you drink? I could probably write a very sad book with them all. I went over to her new apartment to cheer and console her and ended up sitting through one of the most uncomfortable and creepy conversations ever. Some of her statements included, Well, I have to thank him so much because he really did help me to become a better person. Well, I'm still sleeping with him because she doesn't make him happy, and he says he misses me in bed. He came to pick up my son and noticed how much weight I've lost finally, so I really have him to thank for that. He told me he's proud. That really fills me with joy, making him proud. I left and cried in my car for half an hour because nothing I could say would reach her. She went back to him 3 months later, and I haven't spoken to her since. Edit. Some of you are very supportive, and you're obviously very great people. Anyone would be lucky to have friends like you. I'm going to send my ex-friend a hello and maybe leave that door open in case she decides to walk through. Thank you, guys. There are a couple comments here that make me really sad. Apparently, this guy is not alone out there. She needs friends for support. People in abusive relationships isolate themselves very easily, and it makes their abusers hold on to them stronger. Without someone telling them how important they are, what a good person they are, they'll continue to believe the things their abusers say. Your friend deserves help. She most certainly does. She's a great person. I've tried my very best for a long time, but maybe I'm just not qualified enough to be helpful. The whole awful conversation just could not be swayed no matter what I said. So after a year and some of that, I just backed out. It's really sad to hear stories like this, because I've seen people who have been in these kind of abusive relationships, and it's basically like brainwashing. These abusive partners, they will, keep their partner separated. Their words just, when someone that you love starts telling you these things, usually it starts off, kind of down here, and it builds up with just how awful it is. And it infects their mind and brainwashes them, kind of. And so you do have to have a lot of patience with people like that and be there for support and do what you can, but it's hard to watch. Story 2. I'm going to travel, and I might do it alone unless I can bring a person that understands me and knows how to play along, go with the flow and all that, and the only person I can think of is you. What a compliment. This made me really happy. We leave for a hitchhiking trip to nowhere in August. We're both theater people and we have big plans for an ensemble. This is going to be great. Edit. How nice to have this as my top comment. Thanks, guys. Hey there. As a person who travels solo frequently, that sort of hit home. Don't get me wrong, I love traveling solo and being by myself. I'm an introvert who enjoys solitude, but I also wouldn't mind if some of my trips were done in the company of a good friend. The problem is that most people I know are getting married, have kids, don't have enough vacation time or money, etc., to go on a 4-week-long trip to Nepal just so we can go hiking and eat the local food and sleep in tents. That or it's not their idea of a good vacation. But when I get back from each one of my trips, they always tell me that they're jealous I get to have such cool adventures. It's so hard to find someone to go with. This year I was organizing a road trip around Iceland and everyone ended up backing out and I had to cancel. Instead, I'm flying to Japan solo. F it. If I ever turn to someone and say, I really don't want to go on a trip with you, you are perfect, I mean it. I started traveling when a friend said that to me. Not quite you're perfect, but more like, would you like to travel to the end of the world with me to do some hiking? I was honored. It felt amazing. It was a trip of a lifetime and now I'm hooked, but unfortunately since then I've only been on one trip with a travel buddy. I usually travel alone. I had a friend tell me something very similar. I turned around and told him I couldn't think of a single person who annoys me as much as he does, and that he's a total wanker. We went traveling for 5 months. It was awesome. As long as you're going with someone who makes you laugh, you'll have the best time. I actually wanted to do this once in my life. I wanted to just get a motorcycle and get a friend and just travel all around. I wanted to go around the United States. I wanted to visit small towns and just appreciate, the little restaurants that you only find in towns of like 500 people and find little bits of culture and stuff like that. I'm sure I still could, but folks, I'll tell you, you get into your 30s or so close to 40 now, and that kind of stuff it gets to be harder and harder to detach from all the stuff in life, so I don't know, if you're in your 20s or whatever and you're really thinking about doing something like that, here's a little push from me.
Story 3. I have a friend who somehow never seemed down or sad, so I always thought he was just a happy kind of guy. But one day I was complaining about some stupid crap that happened at work. It was over some small exchange that didn't really matter in the long run, but I was letting it get to me hours later. After 10-15 minutes of me venting and saying today was a crappy day, he simply asked me, "Are you having a bad day, or did you have a bad 5 minutes and you're letting it ruin your whole day?" Made me realize it's up to me to have a good day, and that he goes through day-to-day crap too, but knows how to handle it. It made me realize that he wasn't just a happy kind of guy, he was a wise person. Yeah, it reminds me of that Buddhist story. Two monks are walking down the road that had flooded recently. They came across a lady who couldn't figure out how to walk across a stream without getting her clothes all wet. So the older monk picks up the lady and carries her across the stream and sets her down on the other side. The younger monk is shocked because monks should never touch a woman. So they continue their walk for a few hours in silence before the young monk says, "You should not have picked up that lady back there." And the old monk says, "I put her down after crossing the stream. You are still carrying her with you." Damn, wasn't expecting this kind of deepness. Story 4. Friend of mine. We've never been super close, but we're buddies. One day, after the rest of our social group had left and it was just us, we got to talking. He'd had a partner in a project a while back. His partner was a funny guy, but he was terrible at schoolwork. He just didn't have instincts for what teachers were looking for. The project ended up getting a really bad grade. My friend starts talking to him about it. He explains that he chose that guy as his partner because he fascinated him. The partner was a unique kind of guy, and my friend wanted to get to know him to find out what made him tick. I discovered that this friend of mine was a rare kind of person indeed. He was genuinely interested in other people. He wanted to know what motivates them and to understand their perspective. I gained a lot of respect for him then, and I never looked at him the same since. You must be similar to him in that respect because you found out what made him tick and it interested you so much that you remembered it and told the story here. And you must be similar to them in that respect because you were interesting enough to comment on what interested him about his friend was interested in that guy.
Folks, this is a great piece of advice. Get interested in other people. Like, genuinely, if you meet someone new or something, really get interested in them, because usually if you kind of force yourself to ask a few questions and get into their life, sometimes you're going to find out just cool, amazing stuff about people and connect with them in cool ways. It's not always comfortable or easy for people who are socially awkward, but it's worth it.
Story 5. In high school, I knew this kid in history class who seemed pretty slow in all regards. He was pretty much a recluse, never seemed to be able to grasp any of the material being taught, and always had an aide with him. I'm not quite sure what his disability was, but I've always figured he was somewhere on the spectrum. Anyway, I sat next to him, and over the course of the year, I eventually got to speak to him and his aide. His aide did most of the talking, but nonetheless, I was able to consider him somewhat of a friend. Throughout all of that, I pretty much figured that he'd be someone who would lead a fairly bland life, always needing help with things. Looking back, it's kind of a crappy thing to think, but I've seen a lot of people go down this path. I figured he was the same. Summer comes and goes, and I end up getting into AP Calc. He's there. Over the course of the semester, I watched this kid effing killed it. Nearly everything given to him was handled quickly. He opened up and actually spoke very well with other students and was generally the most enthusiastic person in the room when it came to doing the work and helping others. And when the period ended, you could see him quickly go back to how he was beforehand. Last I heard, he was being vetted by a few big tech companies. I've since learned not to judge others so quickly. Story 6. My first year of college, I was feeling a bit lonely at Christmas time because things weren't working out for me to get back home with family for the holidays. One of the friends I'd met on campus in the first semester invited me to spend the holidays with him and his family, and to meet his friends back home. It was as if he and his family had adopted me for the occasion and made me feel truly included and part of the entire experience, as did his friends there too. His invitation made all the difference and was the start for me to do similar good and unexpected kind deeds for others in a more regular, determined way. I was waiting for the negative plot twist, but this is nice. Story 7. In grade 9, I had a friend who showed me nudes of his sister he had on his phone. I was kind of grateful, but then I thought, why the F does this guy have saved nudes of his sister on his phone? Yeah, that's effing creepy. I'm gonna bet he's not proud of that. Kids and teenagers do weird crap. Sounds like you have a story of your own. Teenagers, what did you think was a part of puberty, but really was something else?
Story 1.
Growing up, I was really close with my cousin. We were the same age, lived in the same neighborhood, went to the same school, and had the same group of friends. I remember during junior high school, he changed quite a bit, and at the time I didn't have the mental or emotional capacity to wonder why or figure out on a deep level what could have been happening. He used to be a very fun, jovial, and enjoyed hanging out with me and my friends. Suddenly, around the time we turned 11 or so, he became much quieter, preferred to keep to himself, and started becoming a lot more introverted. I figured that at that time we were all going through puberty, and as we learned in class, as our bodies change, so could other parts of our personalities. I figured, hey, I never liked girls before, but suddenly I want nothing more than to hang out with girls, and so he probably had a similar change, only with regards to his social preferences. I only found out 20 years later that his father got heavy into alcohol right around that time, and he abused him, definitely physically and verbally, possibly other ways. He didn't quite go there, and I didn't push. His father ultimately left his family, and the story we were told at the time was that he was traveling for business, but that everything was fine. So we had no choice but to accept this. It breaks my heart that at that time I could have been there for him, but I had no idea something deep was happening that was causing a fundamental change to my cousin's personality. I just assumed he was going through some natural changes and that his natural personality was coming out. But it turns out the worst thing that could happen to a child, having your parent abuse you, was happening, and that was the reason for his sudden change. I mean, obviously you were a child. You couldn't have known, so I certainly hope you don't, hold any blame on yourself. You can't expect, 11, 12, 13, whatever year old to pick up on that kind of stuff. But I'm glad that, eventually his father went away, and hopefully your cousin's life is doing better these days. So, and the best that we can do is to just let people know that we're there for them. Story 2. I got extremely bad pains in my legs, which was suspected to be growth pains. Multiple doctor visits later without my mother, as she never believed me, and I was told I have very weak tissues in my legs that often tear or get inflamed, and had to start physio to build them up more. My mother still thinks I'm lying, even though I've been diagnosed by professionals. It hurts. Same here. It always hurts so bad to work out. My parents still made me jog with them as a teenager and just told me I was being a baby. Turns out I have a connective tissue disorder, Ehlers-Danlos, and my joints pop in and out of place all the time. It hurts to jog because I'm using all my muscle strength to hold my damn bones together. Take care of yourself and treat your body kindly. I destroyed a lot of things through being stubborn and succumbing to pressure from others. I know that doctors don't always get everything right, but parents, if a doctor says that your kid has a condition, believe the doctor, generally. Like, if it makes sense, don't just be like, nah, I still just think you're faking it. That makes me sad. Story 3. Losing the vividness and emotion of life. I thought society cherished and glorified childhood so much because everything felt so much more real and vivid back then. Turns out I just have a condition called derealization, lol. Edit. A lot of people have misjudged my meaning with this. Naturally, you do lose a lot of the emotions you feel as a child as you grow older, and that is not what I'm talking about. I mean that I have an actual disorder, but I just chalked it down to that. By losing the vividness, I mean literally losing the vividness, like physically losing the vividness of life and my eyesight and hearing and being able to think clearly. I'm not saying that what some of you are experiencing isn't a big deal, because it definitely could be, it's just not derealization. Story 4. When I was a teenager, I always thought that having resentment towards my mom, single parent, was normal for that phase in life. Everyone told me I was just an overactive teenager going through changes, hypersensitive, and it would pass and one day I'll realize how lucky I am to have her. While I agree she was a good mom, I still harbor a lot of resentment toward her over a lot of things, and my family was extremely toxic and would consistently diminish my feelings to make themselves feel better. It wasn't just a teenage mess of emotions. These were real problems that my mom couldn't be bothered with. It was more important for her to be the victim, and that hasn't changed still 20 years later. Most people are on the outside looking in and don't hear both sides of the story. Sometimes the smallest thing can lead to a life of depression, anxiety, and self-deprecation. In other words, you're not just finding yourself as a teenager. Life comes with constant growth and realizations. Don't ignore your instinct because everyone is telling you otherwise.
It's a sad but true fact that, parents, as much as you are supposed to love them, sometimes parents don't do things right, and sometimes they're doing things wrong enough that, as a child, you shouldn't have to be dealing with that. Best I can say is talk to people you trust, and eventually when you're adult, if you truly do not want to have association or contact with a parent, you are not required to.
Story 5. The emergence of a deep-seated anger toward my parents. Television and media showed me that conflicts between teens and parents were a normal part of growing up, and my unidentifiable, at the time, anger was just raging hormones. It didn't help that my family would sigh at me, citing my growing up as being the cause of the troubles. In some ways, they were right. Turns out I was just beginning to understand that my parents were controlling bullies, and they felt threatened and wanted to knock me down harder the more I tried to have my own identity and boundaries. Teenagehood sucks for so many kids. They're just trying to figure life and themselves out and get stereotyped and invalidated by society at large just because of their age. Story 6. Bit of TMI, I started puberty early, so around the age of 10 I started having extreme pains all over my body. Before that I was always aching all over. I was covered in bruises and scrapes periodically my whole life. That doesn't mean I didn't know something was obviously wrong. My mother told me it was growing pains among a slew of other things to shut me up. I got used to not telling anyone I was in pain because I didn't want to be crabbing all the time and being annoying. Uncountable doctors appointed later, at the age of 14, I was taken to the hospital to have a nerve conductive study. Turns out I have CMT. Story 7. I was feeling a very large disconnect from everyone around me, especially people my age. I constantly visualized being in a bubble separate from everyone else, and I had a hard time having conversations, but I just thought it was puberty because I didn't want to self-diagnose, and I figured everyone else felt the same. Turns out it was Asperger's. Story 8. Insanely heavy, painful period, massive weight gain, being uncontrollably mean to my mom, and then crying because I didn't know why I was being mean to my mom. My puberty was so bad my mom took me to all kinds of doctors. She felt like I was possessed and also dying. I physically could not get out of bed on my period. Turns out I have PMDD, bipolar disorder, and an underactive thyroid. I went on birth control at 11 to control the bleeding and mood swings, mood stabilizers around 13, and then thyroid meds at 15, and life was much better.
That sounds awful to go through, but I'm so glad that it sounds like, hey, by 15, that, things were figured out and better. And doctors do goof stuff up, or sometimes it takes a while to figure things out, which is unfortunate when you're spending years of your life trying to suffer through stuff and, hoping for a cure, but I'm glad that at least in your case, they were able to figure it out and help you.
Story 9. I'm a girl and grew a beard. I thought it was puberty, but turns out I'm just Portuguese. Laugh my butt off. I feel ya. I'm from northern Morocco, and those Mediterranean genes are kicking in. Hairy as F, too. Story 10. Sheer exhaustion. Turns out anemia is common in teenage girls, especially when you have irregular heavy periods. I had this too. Looking at pictures from that time, I am shocked at how little color there was in my face. It's really scary. Story 11. Being awkward. Turns out I'm just doomed to always be a little awkward. LOL. Story 12. Not having a period for 8 months. Don't let any doctors tell you that's normal for that long. You'll eventually find out you actually have PCOS. Yeah, PCOS is so damn common yet so ignored or just not even thought of. Or they just don't care. My doctor didn't even bother to try and help me understand it or offer treatment. She was just like, yeah, you have PCOS, bye. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 28 either. Ridiculous.
Yeah, just as I've kind of defended doctors, they are people, they screw things up. There are also plenty of times where it's absolutely legitimate to get a second or third opinion because some doctors aren't great or some doctors just miss stuff. They get focused in on what they are sure that it is, that they don't actually see the real problem. Doctors are people, and that means that they can screw up bad, and it's fine for you to get, other opinions. So, yeah, just trying to say that.
Story 13. When I was young, I slept over at my friend's house, woke up with my boxers soaked. I was so embarrassed that I had a wet dream for the first time, not even at my own house. Turns out I just peed myself. And that's why you pee before bed, kids. Get it? Pee the bed beforehand? Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.